They say, ask and you shall receive. And if Myles Garrett gets what he asked for from the Cleveland Browns, perhaps the Washington Commanders are going to get something that we've all asked for, pass rushing help. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside, everybody, to today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you Monday through Friday, but also I'm your friend covering the Washington Commanders on the ground at practices, games. But here right now, I'm on the ground in New Orleans, Louisiana on Radio Row here in, New Orleans, Louisiana, covering your Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. You can also find me helping out with WUSA9.com's local coverage of the team. And I want to thank you for coming through for this episode today. If you're an everydayer, those of you who come through every day, I want to give you a special thank you. You're probably already subscribed, but if you're not, or if you're new to the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode, in which we're going to talk about stadium insight from owner, managing partner Josh Harris. We're also going to go over some of what he said about rebranding and how the team's success in 2024 might impact the upcoming offseason. But we're going to start off the entire episode by talking about Myles Garrett, Cleveland Browns elite edge rusher, asking for a trade on Monday morning. If you're new to the show, thanks for giving it a try. Locked On Commanders is a daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast, your team every day. So make sure you come back again soon. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Monday morning, I was on my way here to the convention center in New Orleans to get Radio Row kicked off for the week. And news comes across my phone and probably your phone or your computers and your television screens that defensive end or edge rusher, I don't know what the Browns actually classify him as, to be honest with you, but I'm pretty sure it's a defensive end. Myles Garrett of the Cleveland Browns wants a trade. That was the big news coming out. Something that the Washington Commanders absolutely could use help in. Every NFL team, if you don't have Myles Garrett, you can use a Myles Garrett, right? Even the Las Vegas Raiders of Max Crosby could use a Myles Garrett. But when we talk about what teams really need a Myles Garrett, the Washington Commanders are certainly one of those teams. The other two teams that I've kind of speculated and heard some other people talking about, the Buffalo Bills, also the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think that he would fit with really all three of those options. And Myles Garrett certainly stating that he wants to go chase a championship. There's a statement that got released. NFL Network's Ian Rappaport released the statement from Myles Garrett, said, quote, "As a kid dreaming of the NFL, all I focused on was the ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl, and that goal fuels me today more than ever." It also continued, "The goal was never to go from Cleveland to Canton. It has always been to compete for and win a Super Bowl. With that in mind, I have requested to be traded from the Cleveland Browns," end quote. And I got to give a lot of credit to JP Finley, NBC Sports, 106.7 The Fan, all that stuff. Like, he kind of pointed out, Myles Garrett's got 2 years left on his contract, doesn't have any guaranteed money. So we see these trade requests happen often enough in the National Football League, and they kind of come in two forms. One form is a player who's legitimately, look, like, I'm done with this franchise. I don't agree with the path that it's on. It's not for me. I need to go somewhere else. And the other one is, I don't have any more guaranteed money, or I'm entering a contract year and I want security, so I'm going to put the pressure on you to give me a new deal and give me more money. I genuinely feel like this one for Myles Garrett, even though he doesn't have any guaranteed money like JP mentioned in a tweet, I don't think this is about a contract. I don't think this is about Myles getting more money from the Cleveland Browns. I think he legitimately wants to go win a Super Bowl. That's what I think is happening here. Now, I wanted to bring in Spencer German of Locked On Browns to get some of his thoughts before we go deeper into that. So here he is.
If Myles Garrett's requesting a trade, it is time officially to blow it up. And I have been, well, as you might know from watching this show or hearing me on other platforms that I work on, you know that I have been staunchly against blowing this thing up and starting from scratch, because that doesn't guarantee anything. Look what it got the Browns: 2 playoff appearances in a 4-year span, 1 playoff win, and a window that now looks like it's closing even more abruptly than anybody thought could be possible to chase championships. Like, it still didn't get you the ultimate prize. So I'm generally against blowing it up. But if Myles Garrett is going to force his way out, and if this thing is going to get ugly, because right now the organization is saying we're not going to move on from him, you're no longer playing for championships. You're no longer playing to win because you're losing your cornerstone player. You are planning for the future, not winning now. You're trading him for picks. That's what it's going to be. You are going to trade him for draft compensation that allows you to stockpile as many talented players in the next couple years of drafts as possible and build this roster again from the ground.
All right, so that was Spencer German of the Locked On Browns podcast, kind of giving his takes on this whole situation. Obviously, I've made it very clear that I think the Washington Commanders need to try to at least have a conversation about this happening. Look, I understand that the Cleveland Browns, their GM, has already said before this request even came through that he's not interested in having conversations about trading Myles Garrett. Even after this request came out, it was reported by multiple outlets that, the sources inside the Cleveland Browns organization said they're not interested even still with this development and having these conversations. But we've heard people say that before. Like, bottom line, we've heard people say that before. And ultimately, at the end of the day, like, Myles Garrett, if he doesn't want to play for the Cleveland Browns anymore, history pretty much shows you that something's going to happen and something will get done. Just breaking down kind of some of the raw numbers, right? Myles Garrett's 29 years old. He turns 30 in December. So you're going to get pretty much the entire rest of the season in 2025 with him under that 30-year mark, right? Six-time Pro Bowler. He's a six-time All-Pro member. 4 times it was a first-team All-Pro list. Double-digit sacks every year in the last 7 seasons. Again, he's got no guaranteed money left in his contract. Certainly, if you trade for him, he's probably going to want some of those that guaranteed money added on there, or maybe an extension or what have you. But in fact, there's actually an interesting dynamic here where if the Washington Commanders can find a way to put a trade package together that involves sending Jonathan Allen to the Cleveland Browns, if they do want to trade John Allen, and again, I know that's a speculation point that we talk a lot about and we're going to talk about this season, but if that is something that the Commanders are actually maybe aiming to do, if they can trade Myles Garrett for John Allen, and then obviously draft picks like Spencer said there, they could actually gain close to $10 million in cap space by doing that. So it's kind of crazy to think about that, and that's according to Spot Track. But of course, there's another option here to where the Washington Commanders could sweeten the pot a little bit for the Cleveland Browns. Tyler Brook of 33rd Team pitched an idea on social media. The Commanders trade their 2025 first-round pick, the number 29th overall pick in this year's NFL draft, and the 2026 first-round draft pick, which you're hoping, right, is going to be 29, 30, 31, or 32 in exchange for Myles Garrett. So 2 first-round picks in exchange for Myles Garrett was his idea. The Athletics' Diana Rossini came on the net and said that one NFL GM told her that a trade for Myles Garrett could look like probably a first-rounder plus picks. Said that GM apparently said they can't wait for the 3 first-round pick crowd to come out. That's not going to happen. But you have a 1 and a 2, or maybe a 1 and 2 threes. Maybe you throw a player in there. So that's where, again, like I said, in kind of our speculative conversation, John Allen. I put it to a vote. I made up a little Google Doc. I sent it to our insiders, and I asked them 2 questions. Should the Washington Commanders try and trade for Browns edge Myles Garrett? And then which trade package? I gave them 4 options. And I know it's not all of the options, or 3 options, rather, I should say. But I know it's not all of the options, but I gave them 3 options to pick from. Every single insider says, yes, you got to trade. You got to try to trade for Myles Garrett. And I think most of us could probably agree with that theory. The question is compensation, right? And 56% of the voting respondents like the idea of a 2025 first, so the number 29th overall pick this year, and a package that adds John Allen into the mix there. Now, I think that you're probably going to look at like a 2025 first, 2026 third, and John Allen, but that's probably the deal you're probably going to have to look at. The second place finish was a 2025 first and third, 2026 third. So you get 2 thirds in there, but it's a 2025 third and a 2026 third, and then the first rounder this year. And then nobody basically likes the idea of giving up 2 firsts for Myles Garrett, which I think I agree with, because again, you're talking about building this team through the draft, supplementing it through trades. If you're giving away multiple first round picks, that's less of building and more so going for broke and saying, well, we think we're this one guy away from winning a Super Bowl, which truthfully, Myles Garrett is an impact maker enough. That could be the case, but I don't think that's where we're going to go here. So speaking of how this last season impacts the course of direction that this team might take this season, Josh Harris, managing partner of the Washington Commanders, while I was here in New Orleans, he was back in Ashburn talking with some of our other fellow media members about that very thing and the potential of rebranding the team. We'll talk about all of that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with Prize Picks, the best place for you to play daily fantasy sports with over 10 million members, including myself, and billions in winnings, a little bit less than myself. Prize Picks makes it fun, absolutely fun, and simple to get in on the action. So here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Prize Picks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. So check out the promos tab to tail any of these super sweet Millie winners, big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. So download the app today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Locked On NFL, promo code Locked On NFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup with Prize Picks. Run your game. Continue now with today's episode of Locked On Commanders here on Super Bowl Radio Row in New Orleans, Louisiana. If you want to get even more out of the Locked On Commanders podcast, all you got to do, go to joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. From there, you can text me your thoughts, your questions, your comments, vote in our polls like we just sent out today. That's going to influence how we talk about these topics on the show. And of course, you're going to get live stuff from me all the time as well, and access to our insider-only live Zoom conferences, which will happen pretty much every time some sort of big news breaks pertaining to the Washington Commanders. We'll sit down, we'll have a conversation about it, and it'll be a lot of fun. So try it out for free for the first 2 weeks. Still going to have stuff going on in the offseason. Obviously, the regular season is going to be our heavier hitting period, but we will still have plenty going on during the offseason for our insiders. So Josh Harris talked to attending media back in Ashburn. Obviously, I'm in New Orleans. That's one heck of a commute to try to make all in one day, so I did not do that. I stayed in New Orleans while some other folks were in Ashburn covering that press conference. They asked some really good questions, and I think there were some really good topics brought up. I had set the over-under to 3.5 questions before we got into rebranding. Turns out the over-under should have been set to half because the very first question was about rebranding, and Josh was asked on if there's any plans to rebrand, whether it's the name or the uniforms, and if winning has impacted how he views that situation. Josh Harris said, quote, "Right now and now in this building, the name Commanders means something. It's about players who love football and are great at football, hit hard, mentally tough, great teammates. It's really meaningful that the name is growing in meaning. But as far as rebranding and bringing our past, which obviously I grew up with, and all the Super Bowl championships and our future together, you're going to see us head back toward honoring our past and bringing it together with our future," end quote. Not quite the direct answer that everybody wanted. So shout out to Steve Wino of the Associated Press. He said, "Is it safe to say that the Commander's name is staying?" To which Josh Harris responded, "Yes," quote unquote. He also continued, though, quote, "I think it's now being embraced by our team, by our culture, by our coaching staff, and so we're going with that," end quote. So Commanders is here to stay. Uniform might change, even the logos might change a little bit, but Washington Commanders is not going anywhere. And I think that's essentially, if you're an everydayer here on the program, I think I've basically been telling you that for a while now, that was just kind of my assertion and my gut instinct. Doesn't matter if I agree with it or not, or if I liked it or not. If you've been here since before the name changed, you already know what I thought about the name Commanders. That really hasn't changed at all. But I also said the more this team wins, the more the team named Commanders will become acceptable or embraceable by the overall fan base. And certainly there's going to be one-offs. And I saw a fan, actually I think it came through our YouTube comment section, that said, now that Commanders is solidified and not changing, I'm not going to root for this team anymore. I will just tell you, you have that right. You know what I mean? You have the right to choose what team you root for and why. Some people root for teams because they like the uniform, some because they follow college football players. If you decide that because this team is going to stay the Commanders, you don't want to cheer for that team anymore, that is all obviously up to you. But that is the latest from Josh Harris on any potential rebranding. Doesn't look like it's going to come other than maybe some uniform alterations that might connect back with the past a little bit better. Asked about the team's success and how it impacts the offseason. Specifically, Josh Harris was asked on how winning this past season impacts how aggressive he wants the organization to be when it comes to free agency and other moves like draft trades or trades this offseason. He said, quote, "We're looking for Commanders, whether it be in free agency, trades, the draft. Obviously, we have a lot of salary cap flexibility. We have a full slate of draft picks. Certainly we're going to be talking to other teams where we can find players that are great at what they do and fit our culture and are great teammates and are situationally aware and hit hard and are tough," end quote. Well, I'll tell you right now, guys, Myles Garrett certainly is going to fit that culture because Myles Garrett has been in Cleveland for a little while, quite a bit. I mean, the entirety of his career, obviously, right? But he's been there for a while where, he probably could have asked for a trade a while ago, like a couple years ago, and the national public or national media would have given him like, yeah, like you're allowed to do that. The local fans and all that stuff may have been like, oh, come on, man, it's not that long. But even by now, like fans in Cleveland are even like, yeah, dude, we get it. Like Myles, go get your ring, buddy. You deserve it. Great teammate in that situation, right? Kind of like Terry McLaurin, going through the rough times, but not really piping up about it. Situationally aware, I think fits into that. Hits hard, yeah. Toughness, yeah. So I think Myles Garrett certainly fits the bill in all of those things that the Washington Commanders are looking for. Doesn't mean that they're going to trade for him, but I think it makes a lot of sense. We kind of always go through this whenever a big name comes available, or reportedly comes available. We hear every fan base and every team go out there and write the article. Should the blah, 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 should the Cincinnati Bengals, should the Buffalo Bills, should the New York Jets, should the everybody trade for Myles Garrett? But when I wrote that for CommanderGameDay.com, part of Sports Illustrated's family of sites, I actually meant it. You know what I mean? Like there's actually a reason here for the Washington Commanders to trade for Myles Garrett. Also asked how he assesses quarterback Jaden Daniels being on a rookie contract, and if he thinks that leads to being more aggressive in free agency this year. Josh Harris said, quote, yeah, we have a massive opportunity, and none of us are taking that lightly. We are fully committed to continuing to build our team and be elites over the long term. And obviously, we understand that contract and those dynamics. And so, like I said, where we can find players that fit us and that we think are going to bring that, we're going to go after them. I don't know how that translates to aggressiveness and free agency, where Adam and Dan are hard at work, and they're going to have to advise me on that. But certainly, we're going to do everything we can to improve our team, end quote. My translation to that is they're not going to tell us their plans, just like they didn't tell us their plans last year, right? Like, that was really impressive, actually, how secretive they were with all the players they brought in. It was really cool to see an organization that is in sync that much. Like, obviously, I would love to get the scoop, and I would love to get the breaking news, and I would love to know ahead of time, like, oh, Bobby Wagner's going to sign in 2 days. But there is something to be appreciated by about an organization that keeps its business in house. You know what I mean? I think personally. But read the tea leaves, man. History is a clear indicator of future behavior, right? This team 1 year ago would not have traded draft capital for Marshawn Lattimore. Wouldn't have happened. They did it because they saw that in the first year squad, the first year version of this new Commanders team was going to achieve more than expected, had the opportunity to really make some noise down the stretch. So, yes, they want to build through the draft, supplement through free agency, and by trades. That doesn't mean you never trade draft picks to go get players. It just means you want the main nucleus of your team to be built through draft picks. Well, look, that's why I think you don't trade 2 first-round picks for Myles Garrett. You can trade 1. You can trade this year's first-round draft pick for Myles Garrett. Can you say you're going to get 5 years out of Myles Garrett guaranteed? No. But can you say there's a good chance, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33 years old, can you get in that 5-year window for Myles Garrett more production, relatively speaking, to a player you're going to draft number 29? Could you get the same amount or better production out of Myles Garrett than you could that person? I think there's a very good chance you could. So by trading that first-round pick, you're not necessarily giving up the future. You're not giving up the next 5 years. This isn't a guy who's going to retire after the 2025 NFL season. But that's where I don't want to give up the 2 first-rounders. You know what I'm saying? Like, if that makes sense. So you're still building through the draft, even if you trade a draft pick, supplementing through free agency and all that stuff. And granted, we're talking about a third-rounder being involved here as well. So this season's draft class might be a little bit thinner than before, but adding Marshawn Lattimore, adding Myles Garrett again, these are pieces that are supplementing the success you already have from building through the NFL draft with your quarterback, Jaden Daniels, your rookie left tackle, who was very impressive, Brandon Coleman, and then, free agent moves like Bobby Wagner and Frankie Lou. So yeah, again, it all kind of makes sense to me, has some long-term viability, doesn't hinder you from finding opportunities in the draft, right? Next year, if you need a linebacker to replace Bobby Wagner who retires, you can go ahead and still do that. So again, 2 first-round picks for Myles Garrett. That's a little rich. I don't see that being Adam Peters' wheelhouse either. Never say never. But a first-round pick and a day 2 pick, maybe a first and John Allen. And here's the tricky thing, right? How do you do this with only giving up 1 draft pick? I think if there's a path to doing that, the path is this. First-round draft pick, number 29 overall from the Washington Commanders, and John Allen to the Cleveland Browns in exchange for Myles Garrett, and you take the rest of his bonuses. Myles Garrett has a bigger cap hit on the Cleveland Browns than he does the Washington Commanders or in the receiving team in the trade. But if you take, or not his guarantees, if you take the bonuses left on his current contract onto your books, it saves the Cleveland Browns money and basically becomes like a supplement to a draft pick. I've seen it happen before in the National Football League again. So the Cleveland Browns are willing to say, hey, look, we'll take all the money over here in Washington, but in exchange for us taking all of his money, including his bonuses, which would be the dead cap number in Cleveland, you take one less draft pick. You take a day one draft pick here, and you take John Allen, and we go our merry way. So again, I don't know how much the Cleveland Browns would be on board with it, but I think it's a good idea because I came up with it, and I agree with me. So hopefully you agree with me too. But we're going to get back to what Josh Harris thinks and what he thinks and what we agree or disagree with about that. Specifically talking about a new stadium. When is that going to come? Where is it going to come? Josh helped us get a little bit more insight into that information. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Game Time. If you're looking for tickets to your next big event, maybe last-minute tickets to a big game in New Orleans, Louisiana, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. Well, with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. So let me tell you how this works. With Game Time Picks, the Game Time app does all the heavy lifting for you, does all the hard work. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. And if you toggle on the all-in pricing feature, you also don't have any surprises when you hit the checkout line. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and here is why I love it. The curated deals make it super simple to find the tickets you want at a great price without scrolling through hundreds or thousands of different options. The seat view feature is a game changer. Before you even buy the ticket, you can see what the venue is going to look like when you get there. So if you're ready to make your next event even better, download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off at Game Time. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. We're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Commanders. We're going to get a little bit off the Myles Garrett conversation here. I think I've said pretty much everything I need to say about that right now for the time being. We'll see how things continue to develop. And again, I know the Cleveland Browns have said they're not going to accept offers. They're not going to talk about it. But things change, ladies and gentlemen. It's still early February. Let's give it some time. Josh Harris was asked about the stadium. Has some interesting things to say. Starting off with what his vision is for the new stadium. If he wants a great stadium or if he sees it as an opportunity to transform a neighborhood. Josh said, quote, I've got 3 or 4 things in mind. The first, the primary objective is to create a stadium that we're going to win in. He also said when a city takes land and utilizes it for a stadium, they're taking it away from other things they could do, the city being the they. And so it's our responsibility to make it an amazing economic development opportunity for where it is and create a lot of jobs and help that area. Harris continued, I start with we need to have a great place where our fans can show up and as much as possible. We want that to be an advantage to our team in terms of winning on the field, end quote. So yeah, the impact of the economics of the area that the stadium goes into obviously is a part of the consideration. But I think Josh really is trying to recapture that RFK magic that used to be there. We go to Ford Field in Detroit and the home field advantage that provides, Highmark Stadium in Buffalo and the home field advantage that provides. That's really what Josh Harris is trying to encompass. It's a place where the fan base shows up. And it's not just a place to watch football. This is like the Commanders fan base's home, and you want to defend that home. And I think I get down with that vibe. On if the success of the season speeds up the potential timeline of a new stadium, Josh Harris basically said no. That just because they won more. They want to capitalize, obviously, on the momentum and the excitement and all those things, but they're not going to rush to an end here just because they're winning right now this season. On if he feels that Washington, D.C. would be the most politically viable space in getting a new stadium because it would be the most accepted by all jurisdictions. I think most of us, some of us have our selfish preferences, right? Like I would love for the stadium to be built in Sterling, Virginia, because it's really close to where I live and it makes my life a lot easier. If you live in Maryland or if you are just used to the stadium being in Maryland, you're like, nah, bro, it needs to be in Maryland. It's always been in Maryland, or not always, but it's been in Maryland since RFK. Then you can get down with that. But I think all of us can get down with RFK, right? The RFK site is a site that even if you're in Maryland, even if you're selfish like me in Virginia, if it's RFK, everybody can appreciate that. And I think that really is a key here. But Josh talked about that, but he also talked about, understanding the needs of every jurisdiction and how important it is that Maryland wants to make sure that it's taken care of if the team does decide to leave. And Josh really kind of pointed to and said, pay attention to each jurisdiction. They're kind of telling you what they want, and that's going to kind of help dictate things. So like DC was really, the thought process out here is that Josh Harris is like obsessed with getting this new stadium into Washington, D.C. And Josh said it's not so much about being obsessed with getting the stadium into Washington, D.C. as much as it was just making sure that D.C. was at the table, right? For the most part, it really seems like it's just Maryland at the table. Virginia's got the team headquarters. I really feel like Josh is kind of liking the idea of having the team headquarters in one jurisdiction, having the stadium in another jurisdiction. So obviously the team headquarters stays in Virginia, which, truth be told, actually helps my travel schedule the most because I go to more practices than I go games. Then you want the stadium in Maryland or in DC, right? And then it represents all three types of things. So, that's basically what he kind of said. And he just wanted Washington, DC at the table. He's told Maryland that, that's essentially what this is. It's not that they're just obsessed with getting it at RFK or into DC. It's that they want to have every jurisdiction that wants a role or wants a say to have the ability to do so. And obviously, the district getting the rights to that land was the first step to doing that. As far as the update to the stadium and when it will be built, Josh Harris said, quote, "I think we've talked about being done in 2030 as being a best case. We're going to sort of stick with that, not get into kind of the specifics of the timeline because, again, we're reacting to a political process," end quote. So obviously, the sooner this gets started, the better. But right now, 2030 is the best case scenario, which means you could be looking at 2031, 32. But 2030 would be super fun. Super excited to see what Josh and his people come up with. Super excited to go there with you when the time comes to watch some Commanders football. And for now, I'm going to get excited to go to Super Bowl opening night here in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I will be talking to you on our very next episode coming up tomorrow here on Locked On Commanders. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, all you got to do is text me. In order to do that, all you got to do is become a Locked On Commanders insider. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Wednesday is mailbag day. So insiders, you're going to get a text from me asking you for your mailbag questions. And you don't even have to wait. You can get them to me anyway if you want to. If you're next to listen, check out Locked On NFL. Tyler Rowland kicks you off in the morning with some NFL espresso. Tony Wiggins brings you in for some real NFL talk in the afternoon. It's the all-new Locked On NFL, and it's twice per day. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, everydayers. Thanks for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.